This conference will now be recorded.
Academics, core processors, data aggregators, who are coming together to create an interoperable, royalty-free, and voluntary standard. We have no government mandate in North America for open data or open banking, and so we're existing under our members' direction to try to create a standard, leveraging best-in-class practices like FAPI to try to promote data sharing and try to get away from screen scraping and get away from held away IDs and passwords. So thank you for having me. Happy to answer questions. We've got about 12 million users on it right now. We hope that number will be a little bit higher post-COVID, but it's certainly well used so far.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm waiting for our chairman to pop up.
Don Tebow, I suggest we give it a couple more minutes just to wait for some of our presenters to.
No problem.
Thank you to those who recently joined. We're going to wait a couple more minutes before we get started to allow folks a few more minutes to join the GoToMeeting. Thank you.
Well, as we say in the US, Elvis is in the building. And in this case, Elvis is Net Sekimura, the chairman of the board of OpenID Foundation. And Mike, if it's okay with you, I'm going to just give a couple of preliminaries about the OpenID Foundation. And then I'm going to turn it over to Nat. And then Nat will begin the program.
Sounds good, Don. Thank you.
And if you want to put the Wheel of Fortune slide up, that would be great. Hello, everybody. I know we'll be having people dropping in and popping in and out throughout the workshop, but I wanted to welcome you on behalf of the OpenID Foundation and just give you a couple of salient features about the foundation. The slide that's on the on display is what I've been calling the Wheel of Fortune, but its design is quite deliberate in that one of the salient features about the OpenID Foundation is its work groups, but not just its work groups, but the important interplay and feedback loops between and among various work groups. For example, there's a very tight coupling of developments in the financial grade API work group with that of the eKYC and identity assurance work group. And in turn, those two work groups interface with the Moderna work group, which is a work group that works with telcos and MNOs on identity standards, and particularly with our colleagues at the GSMA on making sure that standards and profiles developed in various work groups are compatible with the platform of choice, and that's the smartphone. So we really think that's a distinguishing feature about the OpenID Foundation, and we hope that that's demonstrated in the presentations here. The other piece that's not on the screen is really how these work groups extend into the ecosystem. And by that I mean it's the very tight coupling of discussions, and both formal and informal, with our colleagues in the IETF, the ISO, and other international global standards organizations. We think that really is a necessity in standards development for identity systems at scale. And today we're going to begin with an example of that collaboration between the OpenID Foundation and our liaison partner, the FDX. And we think the discussions that will follow really do prove out the need for this crosstalk between and among standards organizations, so that we really can develop, we can deliver some very practical developments, some very practical tools, and ultimately standards to a broader community that we serve. So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone and the workshop over to the OpenID chairman of the board, Nat Sakamura.
So thank you very much for joining the OpenID Foundation workshop. We actually do have a very full agenda today, and the first in line is FAPI Working Group update and panel discussion, securing the future of the FAPI ecosystem, paving the path forward to FAPI 2.0. And I'll be your moderator for this session as the OpenID Foundation chair. And then we have two distinguished panelists, presenter and panelist Anup Saxena from Intuit, who is a co-chair of the group. Guys, could you kindly mute yourself? And then Don Cardinal from FDX, and maybe you can wave your hand. And I'm not sure if Anup actually is online already. Anup, are you there?
Hi, Nat. This is Mike Les. Anup hasn't joined yet. I just sent him the link.
Okay, so I probably have to fill time, maybe until Anup arrives. Don, I'm talking to Don Cardinal. We can do a little bit of talk and what we've been doing with, with two organizations. Maybe you can start with, maybe you can start with your self introduction.
Sure. Actually, luckily, Don T allowed me to talk a little bit about FDX and myself as chief cat herder. So we're in good shape there. So I did want to jump into, when FDX was getting stood up and we were looking for, a way of helping our ecosystem in not just North America, but any partner as part of it, share data securely. We did shop the planet, and certainly, OpenID Foundation, the financial grade API, or FAPI as it was known early on, certainly got our attention, and we incorporated a lot of the elements by direct reference into our technical space. So we're a big proponent of that, and we're seeing members' adoption of that. And I'm looking forward to a tighter integration, working with you guys on FAPI 2, and plugging in our membership as well. We've got some big names in finance in North America, making sure that FAPI 2 goes around the world, if you will. Don T, was that pretty much how you wrote it for me?
It's right on target, Don.
I think we're gonna have to refer to it as Big Don and Little Don or something like that.
Yeah, it gets really confusing when we are talking. So I understand FDX has got some plans as to the certification programs, things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A standard is only as good as its adherence. I mean, and so one of the lessons we've been able to learn from our global partners is a robust certification program is important. Now, to that extent, we're going to be incorporating, FAPI as far as the authentication protocols, and of course the data set as well. We're still in the process of scoping out our certification program. It'll be by use case. So instead of the full data catalog, it will be the based on different uses, whether it be financial management, tax preparation, loan servicing, that sort of thing. But we're definitely working forward with that, and FAPI will be part of that.
And Don, I think that includes some reference to OpenID Connect as well.
Correct. And so we're still working out the finer points of referring folks who certify against FTX to make sure they've certified or encourage them to certify against OpenID Connect. Why? You've already got something set up. So I've my Chief Technical Officer Dinesh Kachal is on as well, so he'll probably weigh in and correct me where I've gotten off.
Dinesh, can you?
Yes, absolutely. I think, Don, you got it right. We released a document this fall release. It's going to be public on December 3rd. It's called the Foundational Requirements for Providers. And that document references the security profile and our control considerations, which heavily references the FAPI security profile. And the OIDC is a normative requirement within that requirements document.
So to be clear, we do plan on requiring organizations seeking certification against our spec to run the OIDF Conformance Test suite and report back. Does that help, Natsan?
Yeah, very much. Well, actually, I got an SMS from Anoop that Anoop is saying that his computer decided to restart on Windows.
Hi, Nat. Mike Lowe's here. Maybe while we allow Newt to reconnect and settle in, so we don't put him on the spot as immediately when he starts. I think Mike Jones is about ready to go ahead. We could go ahead and get started with the AB Connect Working Group update. And then once Anoop has joined and settled into the workshop, we can transition to the FAPI Working Group update that Anoop will present, and then transition to the panel discussion at that point. Just to not hold up the agenda, if you're okay with that.
That's a good suggestion. So let's do that then. So,
great.
Mike Jones, are you ready?
Let me unmute and project, and then we'll be good to go.
Thanks. That will help a lot.
Thanks, Mike. You're now presenter.
I am looking for the share button.
Like Jones, if you're using the GoToMeeting app, if you move your cursor across the screen, it's at the bottom with your microphone, camera, and screen there.
I see microphone, camera, screen, and leave.
Right. So if you click on the screen, that should allow you to share. I've made you presenter at this point.
Oh, okay. I was looking for a presenter button. All right, there we go. Can people see the deck?
We can. Thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
very well.
So I'm Mike Jones. I work on identity standards at Microsoft, and among others, I've worked on OpenID Connect. I'm one of the 3 chairs of the Connect Working Group. And I'll try to give you a brief sort of status update on where we are with some of the Connect work. And that said, I do want people to ask me questions or give the working group input so that this isn't just a unidirectional conversation. So many of you know this, but you're almost certainly using OpenID Connect in your everyday life, even though it may not be branded publicly in a way that you or consumers see. So for instance, if you log into Android with Apple, AOL, Deutsche Telekom, Google, Microsoft, etc., lots of Japanese companies, including telephone companies, and many more, you're using OpenID Connect. Unlike OpenID 2.0, we didn't try to make this a consumer brand. This is identity plumbing and plumbing that's succeeded. So what are we working on today? There's the session management and logout work. As many of you know, logout on the web is complicated due to tabs not being active and whatnot. So there's 3 different approaches that are specified. One uses HTML5 post message to communicate within the browser. Another uses get to an image in an iframe to communicate with the browser. And the other uses server-to-server communication not through the browser. As much as the engineer in me wants there to be one solution, in fact, these different approaches work better in different use cases. And so in the end, we specified them all. All 3 can be used in combination with RP-initiated logout. And some months ago, we separated that into its own specification. We are in the process of trying to complete these specifications to take them final. There's still some discussions of fine points on parameters for RP-initiated logout. So if you're interested in that, particularly if you have an implementation or are considering making one, please participate in the working group meetings. So the OpenID Connect Federation specification is another major piece of work that enables maintenance of multi-party federations using OpenID Connect. And it defines hierarchical JSON-based metadata for the federation participants. And we've reached second implementer's draft. Multiple interop events for the work are happening this year. Now, there's interest from the research and education community in this, which is why it started in the first place. So for instance, there's a Shibboleth implementation of OpenID Connect, even though Shibboleth is primarily using SAML2. And there's been other implementations in process. So this is very much live work, and we want to enable native federations with OpenID Connect. There's a native single sign-on spec by George Fletcher, which enables single sign-on on mobile platforms across apps by the same vendor. So for instance, AOL, owning AOL and Yahoo and MapQuest, or actually Verizon Media, might use this to enable single sign-on with all of those applications. There's a few pretty simple specs. There's one that defines a new error code that Torsten Lauterstadt had written, unmet authentication requirements, to signal from the OP to the RP that it failed to authorize the end user per the RP's requirements. There's another simple one by George Fletcher, prompt equals create, which initiates user registration or account creation via an OpenID Connect authentication call, requesting account creation during authentication. And there's an active discussion of the relationships between the account creation and the use of existing accounts. Again, please participate in that if that's a use case you have. There's a second errata set in process for the core specifications, those being core, discovery, dynamic client registration. And I'm going to try to get those changes all in this year to put it up for a vote. There's a surprising number of little niggly wording things and whatnot that have come up, but I'm trying to actively work through those. You can see the current state of it at the link below for the core, and similarly, you could see the current drafts for discovery and registration. Some of the primary changes are just referencing the final IETF specs for JOT and dynamic client registration and the like, and discovery, as opposed to drafts that existed at the time that we went final. Now, many of you know that one feature of the OpenID Connect core is a self-issued OpenID provider profile. So rather than the identity provider being at a third-party website, it can be in a native app that you control. And in that case, the identity is represented as a public key. This is used already for some DID providers, among other things, to do DID authentication. There's some discussions in the working group about extending the self-issued OpenID provider profile to enable a level of indirection, so that rather than the identity being a key, the identity is, or the subject is, a URL. And I believe that Christina Yasuda is going to talk some more about that later on. So please pay attention to that. Many of the working group calls are discussing this new work. Now, another piece of work in the Connect working group is certification of OpenID Connect implementations. Joseph Heenan, I believe, is going to talk about the certification program. But in one slide, the goal of the certification program is to make high quality, secure, interoperable OpenID Connect implementations the norm, and in fact, FAPI as well. Certification has two components: technical evidence that you ran tests and passed them, as well as you're making a legal statement that you did so and you passed the tests and you sign that. And certified implementations can use the OpenID certified logo. This has been wildly successful over the past few years, and we're happy with the way that it's increased interoperability. Another interop engagement we had last year that has come to market is Apple started a sign in with Apple protocol and program, which you're now seeing in websites and mobile apps. The initial version of that was both not interoperable with OpenID Connect, although it was close, and had security holes because they weren't following all the practices in the Connect protocol. We posted an open letter. Without replying officially, Apple systematically worked through most of the issues that we gave them, and particularly the security issues. And it's now possible to use standard OpenID Connect libraries for sign-in with Apple in many cases. And thanks to those of you who worked with that. That's another case of the foundation and the working group trying to increase conformance and interoperability in the ecosystem. There's a bunch of related working groups, many of which you'll hear from today, that are doing profiles of Connect or work very closely related to Connect. Among others, there's the Electronic Know Your Customer and Identity Assurance Working Group, where the Connect Working Group incubated a specification for that and then passed it off to the new working group when it was formed. With that, I will just leave you a set of pointers to resources. Now, I will post this talk on my blog, which is the third bullet from the bottom, so it's easy to find. I believe the OpenID Foundation will also post all of the talks on a workshop page. And with that, I think I've come in under my time. I would be glad to hear either input from people about how they're using Connect or input from people about things that they would like the working group to be paying attention to.
All right, thanks very much, Mike. Any questions? Or comments?
Of course, do we need an expiry for the certification, right? So some
Could you
certification.
speak up your name, please? And then.
Sorry, yeah, it's Vinod. Yeah, I'm a independent. So yeah, I was asking more about the certification. Some certifications are obtained like 2-3 years ago. I'm not sure. Do we need an expiration for certification, like 6 months or 1 year?
That's a really good question. What a certification is a statement that at a particular time, a particular version of deployed software passed the then current certification tests at that time. As such, that's a statement which is true forever and never expires. Now, that being the case, there's a number of certifications out there that were done in 2016, for instance, and it's up to the marketplace to decide how much credence to give a 2016 or 2017 certification in 2020. And you'll also find that a number of parties that have certified have continually certified their product as they update versions every year or two. That's a marketplace decision that they make, but it's always true that you did a certification at a particular time. Now, Joseph may talk about this, but in the FAPI world and in some of the open banking world, some of the open banking authorities are requiring recertification, I believe, every 6 months or so. But I'll leave that to Joseph during his time slot. Thank you, Vinod.
Much. Hope this answered your question. And if you have further questions about certifications, there's a dedicated time slot for certifications, so maybe you can ask other questions. Anything else on the AP Connect working group? All right, thanks very much. And now we can transition to FAPI, Working Group Updates by Anup Saxena. Thanks, Mike. Really, yeah, that was a good presentation.
Thanks all for your time.
And Mike Les, if you could.
I'm queuing up Anoop's slides now, noting that he's on a mobile device. So I'll manage Anoop's slides for the FAPI Working Group presentation at his queue, and then we'll once we're done with the Working Group update, any questions, we'll transition to the FAPI panel discussion. So Anoop, it's at your convenience.
Yep. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Nat. And my apologies for the team. I got some last-minute security update that removed my access to my camera and sound. So my apologies for coming late on the meeting. So welcome to the workshop. I think we already started. I think and welcome to the existing members and some of the new members that has joined. So we wanted to start with giving a little bit overview of what the OpenID Connect is. And basically what it is a selective claims provision protocol where one or more set of claims can be used as a federated login credential. It can carry an attribute set of claims, and that's what we call it OpenID as an internal identity layer. It's a cross-grained functional area access control where we could actually control who can perform a payment transaction or who can view the banking account details or a patient information. Next slide, Mike. So basically what an identity layer provides is who is the authenticated user that is logging in and where he got authenticated, when he was authenticated, and how it's going to be authenticated, and some of the attributes you can give to provide who that person is. So these are some of the identity layer, that information that we need that OpenID provides. And to the next slide, please. To give an example of what the set of claims that an entity can have is, this is how the sample would look like. These are set of the claims, some of the examples of the claims, who the issuer is, who the subject is, audience, and expiration, and some of the information we can keep adding in the JSON payload that we have. Next slide, please. So basically, all these defines in an interoperable manner. That is what OpenID Connect is, where the specification standard should be interoperable, simple, mobile-friendly, secure, and flexible. And to be interoperable, we have to define a standard way of how the request should be formed and how the responding of claims should be formed. And that's what it's the scope of OpenID. Next slide, please. In interoperable, what we have defined is the standard set of scopes where we can define what the ID is, what the profile of the customer, like email information, address, and phone that can be shared as a part of the scope. And you can extend these scopes as you define specific for the use cases. And there are methods to ask for the granular claims where a request object and claims can be defined. An ID token that gives authenticated who the authenticator user is and more details about that information about an authenticated user. It can be extensible for that. In addition to that, there could be a user info endpoint where using the token, you can get more details about the user that data holder can share. Next slide, please. And one of the consideration when we define the OpenID framework is it needs to be simple and mobile friendly. As you know, many of the application right now starts with mobile directly. So choice of the protocol is JSON based and REST friendly. And it's simplest to, simplest use case is just a copy and paste of the sample that we can, provide. And it's a mobile and app friendly. So what does the, how does the security of, that define in OpenID? So we started with, it's built on top of OAuth 2.0, where the base framework is OAuth 2.0 provides security that is fine for low or medium risk cases, right? Where you just want to just authenticate. But what we needed more is, especially for financial APIs, where you are dealing with the sensitive data and a high value transactions, you want to have security more towards up north of that's where the OpenID comes in picture, where it is built on top of OAuth 2.0 with an ID token, hybrid flow, and of course it supports a jar. But taking to the next level of financial API, it also added support of MTLS, PKCE, JAM, SIBA-based client-initiated backend channel authentication as well. So financial API security profile in the design is highly secure. It's also formally verified by web attacker model. There was, an independent, organization or an institute that has validated the implementation and for the FAPI security profile. So FAPI, this particular profile is notable, formally verified by using the, a specific web attacker model. And there are not many such protocols that exist today. TLS 1.3 being one of the example, it is up to that level that we have got authentication and formally verified the FAPI profile. And being JSON and allows us to do a data minimization, it's flexible. And it does not disclose any data recipient to data sources, and it decentralize the data storage as well. To return the claims, you have a choice of aggregated, or you could actually do the distributed claims with different privacy characteristics of it. Now it comes to so what did we achieve that in version 1? There has been a tremendous contribution to FAPI framework from passionate volunteers by providing time, resources, and expertise from different regions like Europe, Australia, North America, and Japan to complete the version 1, which has been verified, tried in production as an implemented draft. Actually, it's ready for public comment phase right now. So version 1 has formally been adopted in open banking in UK. Now it's also getting adopted by FDX in North America. FDX is Financial Data Exchange industry standard for financial APIs in North Atlantic region, which covers US and Canada. And for version 1, thank you all for being part of to achieve this exceptional milestone. You well appreciated your continuous support for the future work that is coming up in version 2 is streamlining those APIs more towards a better security model. There will be some more new use cases that we have not encountered that in version 1. We will be including that in version 2. And version 2, of course, it will be yet to be very formally verified, but we will hope that we'll get to that. And hoping that and welcome to all the team members who will who has already contributed for version 1. We would need help in version 2 as well, and basically from open banking, AUCDR, including FDX that is coming on board, to contribute to version 2, and I'll give a little bit details about what the version 2 would look like. So far, this is how the timeline was looking for the version 1. We are a little bit delay on our public review ending part. I think we're coming close. We expect after the voting ends and the publication of the actual standards will be by January, first week of January 2021. And the version 1 includes your, the baseline read-only profile, advanced profile of read and write, CBA profile, and JAM part of it that has been included in FAPI 1. Next slide, please. In version 2, we are excited that there is already some set of draft started with grant and consent management team has worked on. We were planning on including event notification as well. These are one of the 2 high-level items that we would like to include in version 2. It is the right time for our FDX partners to financial data exchange partners to come and contribute in these 2 areas, and also provide feedback on any of the content that we have on version 1 that we can enhance and put that in version 2 as a thing. And these are the tentative timelines we were thinking about. Of course, this will change as we go along with and how we measure our success and trying to meet this milestone. This is the proposal that we have it on for version 2. Next slide, please. Conformance test. So helping community by running the implementation against the conformance test suite is one of the tasks that the team has taken up, and we have defined very good conformance test suite. It tests the features of the standard as well as the boundary and error condition. So it detects anomaly in any implementation quite quickly. And Foundation has invested a lot in building this conformation suite. The team has done an exceptional job in creating this suite that has been tested. More information will come from Joseph in the certification program update. With that, sorry, I ran through very fast because I want to get to the panel questions as well with the timeline that we have. I'm open for any questions.
Thanks, Anoop. If anyone has any questions for Anoop, feel free to unmute yourself and present those, or you can also put them in the chat if you prefer. Seeing that there's no questions, Nat, I suggest we go ahead and transition to the panel discussion that you're going to now moderate.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much, Mike. And Anoop. Yeah, we are starting the panel discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just dived into the presentation. You really didn't have a chance to really introduce yourself. So maybe you can just start from introducing yourself to the audience, and then
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I should have started with that. Dialing it from mobile is challenging. Yeah. So my name is Anoop Saxena. I'm a principal engineer in Intuit. We have our products, flagship product that works in global environment. So we have a very big stake in making sure that these standards are interoperable, global ready. With the, takes a lot of headache of trying to customize for each region. That's our interest. And very happy to be part of this OpenID Connect team and also Financial Data Exchange team. I participate in both the working groups, FAPI as well as Financial Data Exchange, and I'm one of the co-chair of Financial APIs FAPI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Don, I know that you've done some at the beginning of this session, but just for the sake of the panel.
Happy to do it, plus the recording going on. Hey, Don Cardinal, Managing Director of Financial Data Exchange, also known as the Chief Cat Herder. FDX has about 155 member organizations moving toward a common interoperable royalty-free standard, mostly in North America, but it's US and Canada, but we have members around the world. Again, we're heavily leverage the components of FAPI. We're a proponent of that and recommend it. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be publishing some documents in December that heavily reference that. We have about 12 million users on it. That number is growing rapidly, so it's taking a lot of traction. So that's good news. Thanks to hard work from folks like Don T, Nat, Anoop, Mike Jones, and others, and Joseph Heenan, of course.
Thanks very much. Just start with the panel. One of the most important questions that we actually have right now is, what is the most effective way of working together, between the two organizations? And both Anoop and Don, you guys have so much experience within the FDX, so maybe you have some suggestions or something like that.
Certainly, I think events like this are crucial to share updates on what's going on. Not just in terms of the market and our membership and the tech, in addition to the tech. I think it's very important to the extent that we share a lot of members, and we do. The overlap is, I think, 70 or 80% between FDX members being on the FAPI Working Group. The extent that we have joint membership that can help guide and interop, not just here, but at other jurisdictions as well. I don't know, Anoop?
Yeah, right. I echo that. The first is definitely the workshops helps, contributing to workshop like this in OpenID as well as in Financial Data Exchange, the Global Summit. We have a lot of participation from OpenID group as well. And basically this gives us a joint messaging, which is making sure that our use cases are covered. Use cases specific to North Atlantic region, and there are many banks here have a lot of experience in security and privacy considerations and all specific to this geo region. Having them come to OpenID and provide the guidance on to solve for those use cases, that will be very helpful. That one definitely is a plus in there to have this kind of collaboration. On technical side, I think as we know that FAPI 2.0 is starting the work on the version 2. Bundle is open for 2.0, and we already identified few of the use cases where FDX members can actually participate and actually provide some use cases that we need to solve for. Not only that, and also contribute to the specification directly by providing the inputs to the technical standards. And also, one of the best things that I have seen based on a feedback I have heard is about the self-certification that OpenID has done. It really gives us a good template to not only have those certification being worked through all the FDX members in OpenID to have the conformance test suite run, as well as it gives a foundation and learnings to FDX team to come up with their own suite for data APIs. And that's a good way to exchange the technical know-how on these.
And we appreciate learning from your and open banking and other groups' early experiences to help us get a shorter critical path.
We are all for sharing. We standard bodies always appreciate all those things, and we can't achieve anything on one's own. We have to build on top of each other. So can you just talk about what is your idea of the FDX certification is going to be like?
Sure. we have a rather large data set, almost 500 data elements, and so we've hyper-focused on particular use cases, and that is a tax preparation firm would have a different set of data elements they would need to certify to toward than somebody doing financial advising or payment initiation or that sort of thing. So we've got a very much a use case based certification in mind that we'll be standing up. We'll be standing up a reference implementation as well as a sandbox. More to come on that, but we certainly with learnings from OpenID Foundation and their work, to the extent that again we are a FAPI shop, we're going to be encouraging our members to do so, and we'll be standing up a directory of conformance. And I envision being able to link to other what you call competent authorities, because if you're going to be showing that you're FDX certified for one or more use cases, you probably also want to hang some bling on that same page for other things you've earned as well around the world. Now, my CTO Dinesh is on in case I say anything that's incorrect. He's a way better engineer than I am.
All right, Dinesh, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, Don, you covered it pretty well. I'm happy to chime in during any questions on what are use cases, how do we come up with that. I think there's quite a bit of unique aspects to the use case design and deliberation around those, which might be very interesting for some of the folks on the call.
Now, some of the certification we're going to do is not just the data request response, but remember we've also got UX guidelines as well. And so to the extent that we're going to have, some of those are normative, some of them are just guidelines, but that's an important piece as well. And we did, we did get a lot of input and look at other jurisdictions as well. So we'd love further input. We'll be releasing those documents in December as well. So we'd love to have extra eyes.
Yeah, just like UK, right? So UK Open Banking also had the FAPI as a security layer, and then they had a data layer, and then they had a user experience and the performance things. They actually, if I understand correctly, and if I'm wrong, please correct, Joseph, that in the beginning they didn't have the performance guidelines or something like that, and that actually bit them a little bit. So learning from their experience also probably is a very worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah, I think operational excellence is also part of the backlog that we were thinking in FDX. We have not carved out what it means, but that's definitely there in the log, in the backlog.
So there are a lot of banks as well, banks or financial institutions, as well as fintechs in FDX, right?
Yeah, I'd say right around a third or less of our membership. So we've got about 40 different banks and credit unions, provincial and state level, as well as federal. Some are plus $1 trillion. One of our smallest credit unions is, I want to say, a $50 million credit union. God bless them. They're really innovative. But we have a ton of fintechs or non-regulated firms.
The reason why I asked about that is currently the OpenID Foundation's certification is pretty much geared towards the banks, really. Not so much about the relying parties, but we do actually have the relying party testing as well. And do you guys plan to do something on the relying party side?
Yes, we do, for a variety of reasons. One, to be fair, we didn't want any one segment of the industry to have any more burden or hurdles that the other side didn't have. And two, remember, we don't have in North America a federal body assigning access. So if you're onboarding a data sharing relationship between a regulated bank or brokerage or insurance company to some fintech, seeing their technical conformance is one more layer of assurance, along with the SOC 2 and some other artifacts, that yes, they know what the hell they're doing. So it's crucial that both parties, both data requesters as well as data providers, are certified.
That's very good, and I'm pretty sure that actually will help the interoperability among the institutions very much.
We learned from y'all's example.
Yeah, Yeah. So, do you have something to speak on that end, Anup? Because you are actually from one of the largest fintech sites.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we are going to participate in both the aspect of it from an OpenID side and as well as in FDX side. Very excited, and we are actually contributing to the conformance suite in FDX as well. Definitely, this will help validate that we are one of the the client apps that are going to be certified for that.
I understand that Intuit actually operates in many countries, in UK, Australia, and United States, of course, and other places as well. The international alignment on those standards, I mean, especially on the security side or in the plumbing side, probably is really important, because otherwise you'll be developing those plumbing for each jurisdictions. Can you just speak a little bit on that?
Oh, definitely. So, I mean, when we started looking at, we were really worried about in different geolocations. Not only the data API, which we could solve by just doing the mappings of fields, which is kind of okay, but having also the security profile being different per region would have taken a lot of hit on our developer development, and support of the maintenance will be a nightmare for us. So I'm glad that we trend towards the having a one FAPI profile, which most is adopted in multiple regions. With little bit variations we are seeing it, but not much that we cannot handle. Especially after having Australia and North America regions actually onboarding onto FAPI. Most of our work of these major regions has been done. There is more work to be done. I think we have other regions like your STAT and next gen PSD2 in Germany, and some of the regions in Asia are still lacking that feature. But we would love to expand, and hopefully that these regions also go towards FAPI security profile.
And to echo that, to the extent that we can find areas of compatibility, it doesn't have to be everything all at once. Again, if we can get the connectivity, if we can get the authentication, we can get some standards there, and so it is somewhat uniform. The payloads can vary. For example, the UX you'd mentioned, there's UX guidelines that FDX has, the UK has, that Australia has, and they're going to have regional and even local variations in text, for example. But frameworks themselves, to the extent that we can harmonize them, make it easier, lower barriers to entry. I know our regulators, I just got off a call with them this morning, are very concerned about low barriers to entry, repeatability, scalability for underrepresented firms. So the extent that you can give that positive message to the regulators and the press that how standards help all of that, and do so at little or no cost, it's a good message.
Thanks, Dan. That's a really good summary. And we are actually almost out of time. So is there any questions? Okay.
So,
is there any questions from the floor? Alexa answered. Alexa said that she doesn't have any questions, but.
So I have a question here.
Sure.
Pretty quickly even. This is Thiago from Tempest Security in Brazil. And we are seeing a huge movement and discussion about FAPI and other implementations here. And I would like to make a question, because usually people is trying to understand the difference and the intersection between FAPI and distributed identity. Then the government now is making a movement in this direction on distribution of the identities and other stuff. But I would like to understand how you see this FAPI and distributed identity intersection.
All right, so we are actually working together with distributed identifier. DID actually stands for distributed identifier, right? Not identity really, but distributed identifier foundation, DID foundation, to come up with a so-called DID SIOP, which is part of the OpenID Connect Corp specification profile. And we're working towards those, but they are actually quite nascent. And there's a lot to go, long way to go. And there hasn't been any formal proof or formal verification of the security properties and so on and so forth. So it's a very interesting project, and I'm putting a lot of time into it as well. But it's still not something we can actually deploy it on a wide scale, and we really don't know the security property, which makes it really challenging for financial transactions. So I advise you to go with FAPI, and for now at least. And even if you do that, we are also working on the protocol which will work as a conduit between the DID world and OpenID Connect world at the OpenID Connect Working Group, Eap Connect Working Group. So you will not lose much. Did I answer your questions?
Sure. Thank you so much.
Welcome. DID is a fascinating thing, and a lot of people is working on, but yeah. Did somebody want to speak?
Yeah, sorry, it's Vinod again. I have a question regarding the future of FAPI, right? So are we going to have a FAPI? Now, it's great that we have FAPI 2. Are we going to have FAPI 3, FAPI 4, or something like that? Or are we going to have an OpenID Connect 2 with more security enhancement or different levels or different security requirements?
So for now, I don't expect any more than FAPI 2.0. FAPI 2.0 is refactoring of FAPI 1.0, right? And it's not much different, but we decided to shift a little bit of things among the basic baseline profile and advanced profile. And also we decided to make the security assumptions clear so that it will be easier to work on the formal verification or the security proofs. And also what we are doing towards FAPI 2.0 is the different things like concept management, right? Or the grant management is the correct name. We didn't specify that in FAPI 1.0. As a result, each jurisdiction is doing almost the same thing, a little bit different from each other, completely incompatible. So we decided to take it up, and there could be some other components, so to speak. But in the core, from the core framework perspective, I think FAPI 2.0 will be there for a long time, and I don't expect FAPI 3.0.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't clear. I'm also asking in terms of, is there going to be an OpenID Connect to not supporting insecure options in the OpenID Connect 1, right? So yeah, that's more like is there any further progress Foundation is going to make with OpenID Connect 1?
We actually haven't talked about that in OpenID Connect Working Group. You said some insecure options, but then there are perfectly valid use cases to use those as well. For example, if you've got the control environment, or if your APIs doesn't require so much risk mitigations, then the simple solution would suffice. So I don't think we are going to remove those basic options.
This is Mike Jones. It's also the case that a number of the things that have been discussed that are insecure in bare OAuth, we made secure in OpenID Connect through use of the ID token, the issuer, the code hash, etc. And so there's a longer security discussion to have, but even though OAuth is trying to clean up its house, for the most part, OpenID Connect already did so.
Good point.
But I think that the point what that was made is important. I think we need to have that discussion. So out of the top of my head, this is Thorsten Lotterstadt speaking, out of the top of my head, providing access tokens in the front channel imposes a leakage on that channel, and OpenID Connect does not have a countermeasure against that.
And it's a fair point. It's a discussion we can have, but answering the question, we haven't had that discussion yet. I actually have a question for Don Cardinal, if we have time.
Please go ahead.
Shoot.
I am curious about FDX's plans to leverage the OpenID certification program.
To the extent we can, we don't want folks to reinvent the wheel. And we do reference OIDC and the parts of it that make up FAPI in our spec. So I believe we're going to be recognizing it as part of our certification program, whether we do it implicitly or just allow people to post results in our directory of certification. I think it's still TBD, but given that we're on the same off rails, if you will, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that is correct, Don. It is an open discussion at the moment in terms of the nature of the certification relative to self-certified versus FTX certified, reference to OpenID's conformance directory versus requiring submission of test results into FTX. So the discussions are around how to best operationalize this rather than around creating a duplicative test suites. We're absolutely not talking about creating a duplicative test suite. It's more about if we were to make this happen, which we want to make happen, how does this work? How do we avoid some of the pitfalls that we've seen with open banking in UK, and make sure when the certification comes through that there is a certain amount of certitude, there is post-certification monitoring in place, and there's a way to manage issues that are raised by counterparties.
And are the artifacts and outputs sufficient? Remember, we don't have a government regulator in North America looking to that, so we need to make sure that whatever artifacts we have, that the market can rely on easily. And remember, these are not necessarily technical folks in the sourcing department or privacy department, so we need to make sure the outputs are ingestible and understandable in addition to the technical pieces.
All right, so thanks very much, and we are actually out of time. We need to move to the next session, but we do have the Q&A session at the end of the workshop as well, so we could field the question then. All right, so next one which is coming up is Joseph, I think.
Yes, we have Joseph Heenan with Authleet, who will provide a more in-depth overview of the OpenID certification program. So I'll make Joseph.
Great. Hi, everyone. Just
give me a second, Joseph. You are. You're now
Great.
presenting, Joseph. Yep.
Great. So, I presume everybody can see my slides now. So good morning or good evening, everyone, or good night, I think, in some cases. So I'm Joseph Heenan. I'm the certification technical lead for the OpenID Foundation. I think lots of you already know me, as I think I'm active on at least 4 of the OpenID Foundation working groups, as well as the OIDF OAuth working group. And I've been working in this space for a long time now. I've been working with the OIDF certification program for coming up for a year. And before that, I was working with the open banking implementation entity in the UK on their certification program. I've also worked with quite a few of the banks, vendors, and various things in this space. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about the certification program today, and apologies to those that have already heard the basics of this before. So the program has been running for 5 years now in total. We've made various additions over the time, of which probably the most major was adding the tests for the financial grade FAPI protocols last year. And yeah, the program has been designed to benefit everyone that's using these protocols, and it's a very important part of getting these protocols adopted and interoperable and secure, which is really good for everyone involved, really. This slide is slightly out of date now, as it's from July, but at that point we had 485 certifications of 162 implementations, and I think since then we've added about another 30 certifications or something of that kind of order of magnitude. So the FAPI program itself has been going for coming up for 3 years now. It was originally run by Open Banking with their specific security profile that was based on FAPI, and they've since transitioned over to FAPI, and they donated their test suite and myself to the OpenID Foundation. So yeah, and the OpenID Foundation launched the FAPI tests in April last year, then RP tests in June last year. We launched FAPI OP tests towards the end of last year. And we've got optional support for various things. Obviously, we still support the UK Pacific intent lodging mechanism that's used in their open banking. We've just added support for Australian consumer data rights for OPs and for PAR, which I'll talk about a bit more later. And the certification tests also work with app to app, which is where you're using a mobile app as the authorization server effectively. So the biggest change this year has been the decommission of the OpenID Foundation's original Python test suite, which had served us very well for 5 years. All the tests have now been moved to a single Java code base, including re-implementing all the Python tests. It's hosted on a single server. The tests that were moved across have been tested by a large number of OPs and RPs, some of which were already certified and some of which were new certificates. And we've had a lot of good feedback about the tests. And the old servers have now been completely decommissioned. So if you see any references to op.certification.openid.net, then that's a dead site. Don't go there. Other recent changes is we've added some new tests. So these are either for security or interoperability purposes. So the first one was making sure that OPs reject request objects if you try to use them as a client credential assertion. We've not found anybody that actually fails this test yet, but it's very important that the 2 objects can't be confused, and the difference between them is actually a little subtle. We've added a test that servers must accept valid PXE. That doesn't mean you have to implement PXE. It just means if you don't support PXE, then you must ignore the parameters you don't recognize, which is part of the base requirements in the OAuth 2 RFC. And we've added a test that requests succeed with the scopes in either order. That's been allowed by the specs for a long time. There's a range of clients that send them in different orders for various reasons, and it's been a common source of interoperability problems. So it's a good thing to have a test for. And all those tests have been added for both OpenID Connect and for FAPI OPs. So we've got upcoming changes. We're adding support for pushed authentication requests, as I mentioned. That's an upcoming standard in the OAuth 2 working group. It's already come to working group last call. It's an evolution of a spec that came out from the FAPI working group that was called the request object endpoint at that point, but it's been evolved and improved by the spec authors and taken to the IETF, which is brilliant. It's good for privacy and it's good for avoiding size limits and for other things. I know we've got a couple of the spec authors on the call. So. And the main reason we've been pushing to implement the tests for these is that the Australian consumer data rights ecosystem plan to go live with PAR from next month. So we're going to have a certification program ready and waiting for them. And yeah, we've also adapted the tests to deal with a few specifics for the Australian ecosystem, which again, they've adopted FAPI read-write, but there's just some minor changes that need to be made to the tests just because they've profiled FAPI a little bit. So they've just picked one type of client authentication, private key JOT. There's a couple of headers that are mandatory. They say that ID tokens must be encrypted and they mandate support of refresh tokens as well. So the Conformance Suite covers all those things for the OP, and we're talking about how to develop a version of those tests for the relying parties as well. Other upcoming changes is that I think Nat mentioned this, or maybe it was Anoop, that the FAPI read-write spec is just about to go for the vote within the OpenID Foundation members for the third implementers draft. That has relatively few normative changes, but it does have a lot of improvements to the language that hopefully make it clearer for people reading it, as we've had a lot of feedback from implementers since the last draft. And we expect that to go to final this year. And then as we approach that point, the certification suite will have tests added for that version of the spec. And we'll also maintain the tests for the existing versions of the spec. Obviously, both open banking and Australia have adopted the second implementers draft. So we want them to be able to continue to certify to that until they're ready to transition. So the core goals of the program are very much interoperability, security, and just the correct deployment of certified software. And I always make the point that the FAPI tests don't test everything in OpenID Connect core or in OAuth, and you should run the OpenID Connect core tests on your software as well. So lots of reasons to test. I'll not read the whole slide, but I think one interesting trend that we've seen happening over the last couple of months is that some people in the UK have actively started running the Conformance Suite against various banks and pointing out where they don't conform to the protocols and sending them evidence from the Conformance Suite. So yeah, it's generally nicer for banks if you're saying you comply with the protocol. It's a good idea to check that you actually do before other people decide to do so. And I think I'm probably running short on time, so you know, the OIDF's conformance program is a very good program. You should definitely all get involved with it. It's internationally recognized, it's award-winning. Open banking in the UK explicitly endorse it and send people to the OpenID Foundation to do the testings for the security profile, and the OpenID Foundation certification team is actively maintaining these tests, supporting people, helping them understand the standards as necessary, and making sure we add new tests where people bring new interoperability problems to our attention. And yeah, I have quite a few slides now that I originally presented at the OAuth security workshop and were well received, just going through a few of the checks that the suite does. Suffice to say, there's a lot of checks it does. I think every check I'm highlighting here, we have actually seen a production server fail, including one unnamed bank that had published their private key on their server's JWKS endpoint, which the suite detected for them, and they fixed that fairly quickly. And the suite does a range of checks just to make sure people are just respecting the security properties of the FAPI protocol, because obviously if they're not, that's a bad thing and could end up getting FAPI a bad name. So we really do want people to be correctly following the checks. As I say, there's a lot of them the suite does. I'm sure we'll be sharing the presentation afterwards if anybody would like to read in more detail. And we do a lot of interoperability checks as well. So again, this is an example from a real OP which told us that its information for a particular user had been updated in the 525th century, which I'm presuming was incorrect. And people still get their units wrong on timestamps very commonly, and the suite will point that out to them. And again, there's a bunch of these interoperability checks as well. So that's my presentation. The Conformance Suite is all open source. It's on GitLab. Feel free to run it locally. There's a production deployment. If you want help, drop me an email or whatever. So I guess at that point, any questions?
Thanks very much.
This is Mike Jones. I do have a clarifying point. Joseph, you talked about the FAPI tests not testing all the connect functionality, and that maybe people should run the connect test as well. I support that in spirit, but in practice, for security reasons, FAPI made breaking changes to OpenID Connect. For instance, OpenID Connect core requires support for basic authentication, and FAPI prohibits support for basic authentication. So by design, it's impossible for the same deployment to pass both suites. Now, there's lots of software. For instance, I know Ping and others have flags in their deployments so that you can deploy it in Connect mode or deploy it in FAPI mode. But to the extent that we want to test additional Connect functionality in the FAPI suite, we're going to have to just turn those tests on in FAPI because you can't pass both by design.
Yes, that's a very important clarification. Thanks, Mike. I should probably update that slide, but yeah, I think that point is really aimed at the vendors that do support both. And yeah, I think you're also right that there are a few missing tests in FAPI that the core test suite tests that we should in due course add to the FAPI tests as well.
Sure. Maybe update it before you publish your slides. I know that, for instance, I got feedback on my slides from KDDI, and I'm going to fix it before I publish it.
Also, you need to, I've got a few things to be fixed in your slide as well, so I'll send you the comments. But thanks very much for your presentation. That's really good. And although we love to field questions, we are actually running 20 minutes late. So we really don't have time right now. If you wait until the end of the workshop, and if we have enough time, then we could field your question. So next up is Christina Yasuda from Tokyo again. It's like 2:30 a.m. talking about SIOP, SIOP, Self-Issued Open ID Provider. Christina?
Thank you, Nat. I'm very excited to share with you one of the working items in the Connect Working Group that has been going on from the beginning of this year, which is Self-Issued OpenID Provider. And it is the protocols that Nat earlier mentioned that is hoped to be a conduit between OpenID Connect and sort of decentralized identity space. And it is hoped to be used when the identity needs to be provable as attested at the time of attestation and cannot be sort of taken away from the individual, and also for an individual to identify himself, herself, that she is a PII principal that the identity relates to, which can sometimes, you may have heard this in the context of self-sovereign identity. So the work has just recently begun, and the session will be with a lot of open questions, and we really welcome your input. So I will cover what is Self-Issued OpenID Provider, the initial set of requirements that are in draft stage that are hoped to define the scope of this new work item. And the requirements list really combines different to-do lists and laundry lists as the community has worked on. And finally, I wanted to deep dive into several initial discussion points that have emerged. So first of all, what is the Self-Issued OpenID Provider? It is a personal OpenID provider that issues self-signed ID tokens, and it's hoped to enable portability of the identifiers among providers. There are 4 players, as you can see in the screen. The first, the end user is a data subject, basically you, and the claims provider that provide attested claims, and then relying party that consumes the attested claims in order to provide the services to the end user. And then the Self-Issued OpenID Provider itself that asks for the claims from the claims provider and provides those authenticated identity to the relying party. So the first, the subject can ask the claims provider for the attested claims and include it in the ID token when the relying party asks for those. So the really the difference in the flow is there's no central OP, and user is expected to hold its own OpenID provider. Yeah. Then moving on to the requirements list draft that you can find in the Bitbucket. There are quite some number of points, so let me focus on several of those. So first of all, in the SIOP request, the question is, do we want the SIOP to be the extension of the core OpenID Connect protocol rather than an alternative flow? Because, for example, there are several parameters that SIOP currently does not support. And the next, another point being SIOP being able to be used both for logins as well as for transmitting identity characteristics, and SIOP being able to support the best practices of the flow types. The SIOP currently supports implicit flow. And another big point requirement has been raised is in the response. So Self-Issued OpenID Provider being able to support and return verifiable credentials and the verifiable presentation, which is a new data format that has been standardized in W3C. And one of the big discussion points have been the derivation of the key information. Currently, it is sub-JW case with URNs. However, there has been a point raised to be able to derive the keys using decentralized identifiers and resolving them into the DID documents. For those who may not be familiar, decentralized identifiers are resolvable identifiers that can be resolved to a set of statements about the DID subject of the end user, including a set of cryptographic material. And this cryptographic material can be used as an authenticatable identifier in the credentials. And another big point is really the trust model between the relying party and the self-issued OpenID provider, because self-issued OpenID provider could be the native app. It's almost impossible to have a dynamic client registration or a discovery mechanism. So how does the SIOP advertises that it is actually the SIOP-enabled OP, which leads to the question on the invocation? And how does the SIOP advertise the configuration information to the relying party? And finally, how does the relying party can register with the self-issued OpenID provider? And a couple of other points, issuance of the claims. This is very unique to the self-issued OpenID provider, which introduces this new role of the claims provider, because there's a need for a SIOP to be able to register with the claims provider. And in terms of privacy protection, it's very important for the RPs to be able to understand the security and privacy posture of the self-issued OpenID provider, because there are not many existing deployments. So this really needs to be investigated more. And then support for pairwise omnidirectional ephemeral identifiers, attestation in terms of past, and being able to receive the claims when the end user is offline. The claims binding, there's also related draft on aggregated and distributed claims and OpenID Connect credential provider drafts that speak to this sort of not just the verification side of the claims, but the issuance side of the claims. And several requirements came up to be able to support different deployment architectures, including PWAs, progressive web app-based implementations, where PWAs could serve as the credential holder, and device flow paths where the relying party and the SIOP are not on the same device. And there are also several use case specific requirements that would not be a must, but could be considered, such as support for rich identity information sharing, selective disclosure, and offline authentication. And just wanted to cover several discussion points that have been raised. So one is, how do you find the self-issued OpenID address? Because essentially, again, you cannot do a pre-registration. A question being, and also where, if there are several SIOP wallets on my mobile device, which one gets invoked when the request is received? And currently, the wallets register custom schema, but this introduces certain dependencies on the OS. So is there a way we can make this work without OS support? And there has been ideas such as capability broker, but this could introduce another level of centralization. So again, from a user experience perspective, maybe it would be a better idea to leave the current OpenID schema mechanism, so to prevent the user confusion or existence of several wallets, but this is very up to discussion. And then in terms of conduit to decentralized identifiers, still a lot to consider. So how do you advertise the support for decentralized identifiers, whether it's a new extension to the existing parameter or introduction of a new parameter, where would be the best place to represent the decentralized identifiers, the issuer field being restricted to be URL. And so the discussion has really been to introduce a level of indirection to the subclaim to allow it to be the sub to be a URN. And there are several additional cryptography mechanisms that would be required if decentralized identifiers would be used. And this work has really been done in close collaboration with Decentralized Identity Foundation, and especially the DID Auth Working Group there. So yes, discussion has been happening during the Connect calls, and the Pacific time zone calls has been made weekly from bi-weekly cadence, and there are also bi-weekly Atlantic time zone calls. So you're welcome to join the calls, and also please take a look at the issues and drafts. There are also self-issued identifier draft in the same Bitbucket repository. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Again, I'd love to field questions, but we are quite late, so we'd like to go on to the next presentation by Roland Hedberg for OpenID Federation updates.
Okay.
Give me a second, Roland. I'll make you the presenter.
Right. Well, I can start with saying that we've been working with OpenID Connect for, I don't know, 10 years now, something like that. I was responsible for the Python implementation of the certification suite. Okay. So, but that's history. So now I've been working with OpenID Connect Federation, and as Mike said, this came out of the academia. We have in the academia been running a SAML federation for now a number of years, and the number of participants of that federation are in the thousands. So that's where it started. So we wanted to do something which was based on OpenID Connect and better than the federation that then was based on SAML. So the problem we didn't want to solve was sort of where you have one RP and one OP, or you have one RP and several OPs, or one OP and several RPs. You can see that sort of all these three variants are active at the internet right now. What we did want to solve was where you have lots of RPs and lots of OPs, and you wanted to dynamically collect metadata. So the RPs could collect metadata about the OPs dynamically and vice versa. So what we had to add then was, of course, first it's sort of a payload system, which we called entity statements. The second was that we had a trusted third party. We couldn't sort of do anything without that. We found out we had something called trust chains. We have what's called explicit and automatic client registration, and then the metadata policies. And I go through all of these for you. First, the entity statement is a JSON web token. It has a normal sort of claims, issuer, subject, and so forth, but it has a couple of claims that are specific for the federation stuff. And the ones we're going to touch on now is the authority hints, JWKS, metadata, and metadata policy. Authority hints is basically a superior that knows something about an entity, a subordinate entity. JWKS is, of course, the public keys of a subject. Metadata is metadata. Metadata policy is then a policy that a superior has about the metadata that the subordinate can publish. The structure is, we didn't want to limit ourselves here. So we have leaf entities, which are RPs and OPs, and you have the trust anchor. But then in between there, you can have any number of intermediates from 0 to, I don't know, what sort of the upper limit would be. So far, when we played around, we usually have 1 or 2 intermediates. Trust chains is very important. So you have to know how to collect trust chains. It's basically a set of entity statements. And you start with getting the entity statement in some way from a leaf entity. That entity statement contains the authority hints, and you use those to go to superiors, in this case, intermediate B, and you ask for its view of the leaf entity, and you get that. It contains authority hints, and you go next step, and you ask intermediate A about intermediate B, and so forth until you reach the trust anchor. And when you reach the trust anchor, you stop. So in this case, you have 4 entity statements in the trust chain. Now, to verify that no one has tampered with this trust chain, you have the public keys of the trust anchor, and the entity has gotten those in some out-of-bands way, some secure out-of-bands way. Now we can use that to verify the signature of the entity statement got from trust anchor. And if that's okay, it gets to public keys of the, in this case, is the intermediate A from that entity statement. You can use those to verify the signature of the entity statement you got from intermediate A, and so forth until it reaches the leaf entity. So that is how you do trust chain verification. You also have metadata policy, and there you again start with a trust anchor, and then you combine that with any policy that intermediate A has, and then you combine the combine with what you get from intermediate B, and then you apply the policy to the metadata you got from the leaf entity. So that can also sort of extend to any number of intermediates. What's important is that if whatever intermediate has when it comes to policy only can restrict what the trust anchor says. So you can't add anything new that would extend what the trust anchor says. So that's about that. So we have two types of client registration. The first one is the explicit, which is like the OpenID Connect core dynamic client registration, but we send entity statements instead of metadata. And that's because we want to make sure that no one has tampered with the information en route. Automatic client registration is a bit more complicated. There is no explicit registration, so the first message sent from the RP to OP is an authentication or authorization request. It contains a request object by value, by reference, or you can also use PAR in this case. The client ID in the authentication request is the RP's entity ID, and that can then be used to fetch the first entity statement and then to sort of go from there and collect the trust chain and verify the metadata. Once you have verified metadata, you can then verify the signature of the request object. And that should be, if it's asked, okay, you believe in that, and you continue with the authentication authorization. We have done 2 interoperability testing, and this is the set we've been using. We have a federation operator, and we have 2 organizations. One organization contains 2 RPs, one doing explicit and the other automatic registration. And then we have the second organization, and we added a number of OPs there. And these are the ones that had actually participated in interoperability testing. Connect2ID has an implementation. I have an implementation, that's the IDPI implementation. And then, as Mike said again, the Shibboleth Consortium also have an implementation. So we have done sort of between these, we tried to verify whether what I talked about when I touch trust chain collection, trust chain verification, understanding, entity statement, and so forth to verify that. And the outcome is that we have actually been quite successful. We understand entity statements and can produce them. We do trust chain collection correctly. We do trust chain validation, and we do explicit and automatic client registration. That's how we got that as far as we've gotten. And all of these 3 implementation works. We haven't started to test metadata policies yet. That is the next step. And we also want to bring in more RPs. And there are a number coming now. So the next interoperability testing, which is end of November, beginning of December, will include more RPs, and also we will do metadata policy. So that's where we are right now. So I'm done.
Great. Thanks very much, Ron. As Michael has announced, to catch up with the timing, we are actually skipping the scheduled break and we are directly going to eKYC and ID assurance working group update by Torsten Loderstedt.
Your presenter now, Torsten, please go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, sure. All right. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Hi, this is Thorsten Lotterstedt. I am one of the co-chairs of the eKYC and Identity Assurance Working Group, and I've got the pleasure to introduce you to what we do in that working group and what the current status is and what we are heading for. So the eKYC and Identity Assurance Working Group was founded with the objective to develop OpenID Connect extensions for supporting high identity assurance use cases. And it's basically focusing on providing ways to provide relying parties with verified claims along with additional data about the process that led to the verification, what evidence was used, and so on. The current specification is OpenID Connect for identity assurance, but the working group will most likely also produce additional specs. So what's the challenge we want to cop? So OpenID Connect, as we have heard, is used in a number of use cases, and it's in increasingly numbers used in cases where strong identity verification is required. You see a number of use cases in the upper part of the slide: anti-money laundering, health, fraud prevention, and so on. And the challenge is, if you take a look under the way identity information is shared today, that in an ID token, for example, an OpenID Connect ID token, you get the payload. You get an identifier, you get, for example, an email address, a name, and an address, and a birth date. But the problem is there is no general way to also augment that with additional information about the trust level, for example, of a certain claim. And this is information a relying parties operating in a regulated environment typically need in order to use this kind of data for their use cases. So the question is, how can we extend OpenID Connect to convey certain information to the relying party, which is according to what rules were the data verified and how are they maintained? Who verified the data? When were the data verified? How were they verified? And what evidence were used to actually verify this identity data? OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance defines a representation for verified claims along with this information that I just mentioned before. And it does it in a way that it is an extension to the way this data are represented in any kind of JSON representation. So you can use OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance syntax to express verified claims in not only in OpenID Connect user info responses or ID token, but any kind of JSON-based format such as JSON Web Tokens as access tokens. I will come back to that later on. And with that, OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance allows a relying party to map and to assess the identity claims it obtains from an OP to the requirements of its regulatory context. And it gives also additional data to resolve disputes, for example, because the data being provided by the original OP also allow to really nail down when an identity verification took place and so on and so on. So it's kind of an audit trail in the end. How does the representation look like? This is a small example, and you see in the lower part, or first of all, we have built a structure. We have built a structure which is called verified claims. And if you encounter a verified claim object in a JOT, for example, in an ID token, then you know, okay, in this section, I'm going to see verified claims, which means I see claims with additional metadata about these claims. So there's the verification element that, for example, gives rise to the trust framework that the OP underlies, what evidence were used, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then you've got a container that also contains the claims that are the actual payload of that assertion. And a certain JSON object or a JOT may contain multiple of those verified claims. So it's possible to for an OP to provide the relying party with different subset of claims that, for example, were verified according to different trust frameworks. And this also allows to clearly delineate and differentiate between verified and unverified claims, because in such an assertion, you can also see standard claims that were used before. So the main concepts of OpenID Connect are explicitness, meaning that all the data about the verification status of a claim can be represented explicitly and can be assessed and also tracked and stored by the relying party. There's a clear distinction between claims with and without attestation, which means unverified or claims without an attestation of the verification status, and claims with attestation of the verification status can be provided in the same assertion. And this, the representation or the syntax we've defined allows to reuse existing OpenID Connect claims. So basically what we do is there is no need for an implementer to extend the definition of claims with fields to represent metadata about the verification status. Instead, due to the design, any claim can be put into the verified claims container, which also allows products to implement or to support the syntax right out of the box. It's versatile, as I mentioned, since it cannot only be used in OpenID Connect context, it can also be used in all kinds of tokens, introspection responses, and so on. And we, for example, use that as the representation, speaking as the yes.com representative, we use that to represent verified identity data in introspection responses, exchange between an IDP and a certain resource server creating electronic signatures. And it's been developed with privacy in mind. So we generally recommend use of the claims parameter that was introduced in the OpenID Connect core to request the data about the user on a really fine-grained level, and to also ask for the verification data elements. And we also have an additional feature that allows the relying party to specify the purpose of a certain request or the purpose of requesting a certain claim with that request. And I will come back to that later on in a status. We are right now developing a further feature that allows a very privacy-preserving age verification, where the relying party or the OP does not need to disclose the date of birth, but the relying party can just ask for, yeah, is this user over 18, for example. The standard is international, so the working group itself has members from a number of places. So North America, the UK, European Union, Japan, Australia, France, and so on, and so on, and so on. And that's very important because the topic of identity assurance is very, very tightly coupled to the regulatory and legal requirements in the different jurisdictions. So it's very important to get input from all those different jurisdictions to be able to build a standard, a technical standard that allows to implement identity assurance in different jurisdictions. So in the end, what we ended up with was a clear separation between the, let's call it the transport layer, or I think Don usually calls it the tools layer, the tools, which are able to transport claims along with the metadata. And then an implementer needs to define certain identifiers for the trust frameworks and the identity documents and the verification methods that are used in a certain jurisdiction. And we have started to define some of those identifiers and to maintain them in our wiki. The current status, the second implementers draft was approved by the OIDF membership in May, and there are several implementations that already use OpenID Connect for identity assurance, both products as well as real deployments. And yeah, we're making good progress, and right now preparing the third implementers draft, which will bring additional features. We didn't change the core of the specification. That's quite stable for some time now, but we are adding additional features, mainly claims and additional elements. Most notably, the feature for age verification that I just mentioned. We added a claim for representing mobile numbers, or telephone numbers, and for representing alias names, such as artist names. And we are also working on a feature to allow a OP to either directly or by reference convey images of ID documents that were used as evidence in the identity verification. That's especially important if the OP is in the end an identity verification service that, for example, in real time identifies the user using a video chat or an auto-ident approach and so on. Yeah, we did a lot of editorial improvements. We are aiming for final publication of OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance after Implementers Draft 3. And we'll also then focus on working with potential adopters. I just listed some of them. If you are interested to implement OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance, please get in contact with us so we can discuss your use cases and understand how we can support them with our protocol, or what we need to do in order to be able to. We plan to implement conformance tests, and we are looking for funding right now to be able to do so. And we are looking at new topics. One of them would be an expression language that also would further improve the privacy character of the specification, because it would only disclose a true or false answer to an expression that is specified by the relying party over a certain set of claims. And we are working on a solution or extension for also supporting identification of legal entities, or better put, for authorized persons that act on behalf of legal entities. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So please, if you are interested, please contribute to this effort. If you want to know more about the working group, I put the URL of the working group on this slide, and we meet weekly at 4 p.m. CST on Wednesday. And with that, do we have time for questions, or do we just directly?
Thanks, Thorsten. Maybe we can field the question at the end of this workshop.
And/or feel free to submit some questions in the chat, and Thorsten and others can respond.
That'd be good. And we've been doing some chat. Anyways, and the next one is going to be Mike Johns talking about EAP.
Thank you. Please make the presenter and we'll go.
You're good, Mike.
Okay. Pulling it up. All right, I'm going to try to get time and be very brief. So we're talking about the Specification Profile Working Group. The EAP Working Group is chartered to develop security and privacy profiles for OpenID Connect. that enable people to use strong authentication methods. And there's been two different specifications: token-bound authentication that uses token binding, and one that defines additional ACR values. I'll talk about those in turn. The IETF token binding specs became RFCs in October last year. Unfortunately, or was it 2018? It's blocked by my screen. Unfortunately, adoption stalled due to Chrome's removal of token binding just as they were finishing. So while there's both OAuth and Connect specs, work on that is currently on hold pending adoption progress of the token binding core specs. The work that is current is we defined two ACR values that are somewhat like the old PAPE values. One is phishing resistant, meaning that you can't phish the authentication mechanism and succeed. So for instance, use of a public key. And phishing resistant that's hardware protected, so that you know that the key is securely held in a piece of secured hardware. Now, there's also been a request to define a new authentication method value called POP, meaning that you're doing proof of possession. That corrects a omission in the RFC where it defined hardware and software POP, but not generic POP. So we're going to do that. The working group chairs are Brian Campbell and myself. We have calls scheduled every 2 weeks on Thursdays, but we haven't been having them lately. We will once some updates are done. And that's it. And let's push questions to the general question period to help get us back on track. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. And the next one is FastFed Working Group by Darren McAdams.
Hey.
You should be good now, Darren.
Cool. Let me just get this up here. All right. Just to double check, you can see it?
We're good. Thanks.
Cool. I'm going to spend kind of most of the session talking about current updates, but I think just for anyone who doesn't have the context here, I'll do a quick just intro on what this is all about. FastFed is trying to solve the problem of low adoption of federation, particularly in the enterprise settings, where it's just super hard to configure. And a classic example of this is G Suite going to AWS, where I work. 44 steps for an administrator just to set this up. So it's just kind of misery for everyone. If you're the poor admin, it's taking you a couple weeks. If you're the identity provider, you got all these different apps doing things in different ways. And if you're the person building the app, you see all these standards with no clear guidance on what to do or how to integrate with these identity providers. So we're really tackling that problem. And the root of it is this poor admin being the person in the middle trying to reconcile all these differences and make stuff work. They just have to be complete identity experts. So, the high level, how do you let these two talk to each other directly so the admin just doesn't have to be an identity expert? I'm not going to go into all the details of how FastFed works. If you want to know more, there are YouTube videos. We did a session at Identiverse, 20 minutes. We'll kind of give you an overview on why we had to do anything at all, why aren't existing standards sufficient, how does it actually add value? And of course, in the OpenID bid bucket, you can find all of the specs, as well as the discussion artifacts and which scenarios we were going after. Really quickly, though, I'm going to hit two common FAQs because they come up almost every time I talk about FastFed, so just really quick. Very common one, like, does this replace all these acronyms that you know and love? No, it's just trying to address those 44 steps that it takes right now to set them up. So it's sort of how do you bootstrap trust from zero to getting these things running by someone who has no awareness of any of these technologies at all. And it also sort of defines the subset of each to implement. And what I mean by that, this is a true story. Here in AWS where I work, we recently added inbound SCIM support. And we started making sure we were compatible with Azure. And guess how many, once we finished Azure, guess how many other IDPs we were compatible with? The answer is 0. Everyone did it in slightly different ways, and it was just terrible. So, while a lot of the things we're talking about here with OpenID Connect, a lot of spaces you do have great profiles to handle interoperability, but that is not ubiquitous in every technology. So we had to fill in some of those gaps. The other common question, just really quick, is what's the difference between FastFed and a session you saw earlier, OpenID Federation? They are solving different problems, but complementary. What's really going on here is there's not enough words in English, and we use federation for 2 different concepts. FastFed is using it as sort of the synonym for setting up single sign-on. You hear this a lot in the enterprise system, versus OpenID Federation is the concept that you see a lot more in higher ed and research, which is there's a collection of parties who join a club together in a way, and all agree to be bound sometimes by some compliance requirements or auditing, and they want to attest that they are in this club. And so they're sort of complementary. So the latter is looking at how do you include this attestation in the OpenID exchanges to prove you're a member of the club. And then FastFed is well, how do you make all this work without the person setting it up being an expert? So what's the current status here? So we're actually building. And we're building, FastFed is not going to come out, like some other standards where you'll see big press releases saying, hey, this system is now FastFed compliant. We're going much more iteratively, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So, I mentioned these interop profiles. So before we get to this whole end-to-end experience, we're going through these building blocks, starting with SCIM to make sure that we can even comply with the interop profile. And just here's a quick little, example of what I mean. If you look at the spec, you'll see something like the FastFed SCIM profile. And way down there in Chapter 4, the interop requirements, if you want to create user, update user, deactivate user, it tells you what to do. So, here in AWS, as I mentioned, we found ourselves incompatible with pretty much everyone when we first did SCIM. And so we actually held the line. We said, you know what? We are going to implement the FastFed profile for SCIM. You should too. And so we're actually seeing that adoption take off. Folks like Okta, OneLogin, Ping have actually made changes to be FastFed compatible. So, even though we're approaching this iteratively, we're already seeing value come to us in production, real production systems. After SCIM, we'll probably tackle the interop for SAML. I think we're a little bit closer there. I think one of the big deltas is making sure that we handle certificate rotation automatically. And that means that there's some SAML best guidance for how you convey multiple keys and how you add one and remove one. And so there's some guidance there. And then I think we'll keep going after we get those building blocks in place. Then you add the handshake, which you'll see if you watch any of those FastFed videos, kind of the super simple experience we're trying to deliver. And you can imagine it keeps going. Other profiles, naturally, hey, how about OpenID Connect and other segments that aren't enterprise? We also have some open source work going on. There is a Java implementation, FastFed for J. The approach this is taking is it's not like you download this and run it and you're completely done, because most apps and IDPs will have their very own opinions about the customer experience they want to deliver, or so what data store do you want to use to store all this stuff? If you're running on Azure, you might make a different choice than if you're running on AWS or somewhere else. But what it does provide is a lot of the heavy lifting behind the scenes. What are these messages being passed around between parties? How do you sort of marshal them? It has all the compliance checks and security checks. So if you're using this, you can be assured that you and your peers are going to be compliant with the spec. And it solves some of the other heavy lifting, which is a little bit tricky. Like you can use FastFed not just to set up a federation relationship, but also to update an existing one. And so you can imagine that raises some questions like you see this exchange happening. Is this an update? If so, how do I figure out what's being updated? And so it's got a lot of utilities just to help make that simpler. We haven't really evangelized this too much because it's still in progress. I think as engineers, we're famous for saying something's 80% complete when it's not, but I do think this one's getting super close. 12,000 lines of code so far. So what's the status? Given everything I told you in the work in progress, you may assume it's an implementer's draft, but it's actually not. It's still just a draft. We called, just kind of catch everyone up if what's been happening. Last time we were together, we had called for the implementer's draft, but we actually got 8 objections. So we actually paused. And so just to kind of bring this to a close, I'll describe what those objections were and kind of what we've done since then. To explain the objections, I just want to quickly iterate like how the spec is structured. It's in a couple parts. There's a core part. This describes sort of the behind the scenes handshake for how the two parties find each other and exchange information, but it's not bound to any particular protocol. There's nothing in there that says SAML or SCIM or OpenID Connect or anything. Think of it like it's like the carrier frequency that explains how messages can be conveyed, but not what the messages sort of are. And then you layer upon that, you know, if you want to set up SCIM, here's how you can like convey your SCIM endpoints and anything else you need. And similar with SAML. So that was basically like the structure of the spec. And in terms of the 8 objections, they were super focused in one area. It turns out they were all about the SAML profile, and in particular, the Interop profile. We didn't get, actually, I didn't get any comments on the other parts. And so we had the conversation, and it turns out, I think this is not to sort of brush it off, but a lot of it was naming confusion. And what I mean by that was this working group was kicked off to solve problems that I think are very acute and sometimes even just isolated to the enterprise scenario. You know, a business workforce, for example, trying to connect to Salesforce or, you know, that sort of stuff. And it was a group composed of pretty much all enterprise industry folks. And so from that lens, we were laser focused on the problems that we wanted to solve for enterprise. But we had called the profile the basic SAML profile, which did not convey at all sort of the goals or the scope or the fact that this wasn't meant to be for everyone. It was targeting a specific set of scenarios. And so just to, I think, eliminate some of that unnecessary confusion, small change, but I think it's helpful. We renamed it as enterprise. Again, you can define any number of profiles. And so if you know, just to pick a random example, you know, InCommon is a group, I think in the US, for example, that does a lot of higher ed. If they wanted a profile, there could be you know, an InCommon SAML profile or really anything you want to do here. It's kind of pluggable. The other big area of conversation was the SAML subject that we specified in the FastFed interop requirements. Before we said it must be the username. That's a SCIM terminology. Username is essentially the string that people use to log in, sometimes an email, but not necessarily. And that reflected what is pretty much the near unanimous behavior of the enterprise segment on how they do SAML. So we just sort of codified that, but there was a bunch of discussion about some cases where you might want a different value. And so one change we did made as we took this feedback was to make that somewhat configurable. And what I mean by that, this is just a snippet from the spec. There's now a mechanism for the app to choose one of a couple different options. You can choose a persistent ID, a username, an email address. And we also added a bunch of guidance, just, you know, as a reference to implementers. Here's how you might think about which value to choose. Now, just my personal opinion here, I think we'll continue to see username get used a bunch, even though I think, you know, folks, if you're experienced with this, will know, you know, oh, usernames can be recycled, they can be changed. There's all sorts of problems that we know about with using mutable fields as the identifier. And there's reasons that I think the enterprise segment will keep using it. One of the things that's common there, for example, is a lot of, you know, enterprises might flip between providers a bunch. We see people who use Azure for SCIM, but Ping for login and switching between providers. And it turns out these persistent IDs are currently set by the provider. And so if you're flipping providers or trying to use multiple ones at the same time, none of them are sharing the same persistent ID. And so really the only value you have to hang your hat off of is that username to try to do any sort of reliable joining. So there's that factor that's in play. And another factor that's in play is, what about, all these scenarios of username changing, or, really if you do just-in-time provisioning, there's all sorts of problems. Like, how do you find out if a user got deleted? And so the other reason that's sort of less of a concern with enterprise is we're seeing growing adoption of SCIM in addition to SAML. And SCIM provides you that sort of near real-time out-of-band channel to quickly be notified if someone changes their username or if account was deleted. So it reduces the probability of running into those events by a great deal, to the point that that's sort of why I think the enterprise segment has settled down where it is it works, and sort of doing other things is a huge step up in effort and complexity that people have just struggled to even tackle. So given those changes, I think up next, as soon as Mike digs out from the thousands of emails that we all buried him under with requests while he was on vacation, we're going to get these new specs uploaded, and you'll be.
Wow.
Oh, all right. You're back. Cool. Thanks so much. So I think you'll be seeing after this in the coming days a call for vote on implementers draft again. So obligatory, hey, everyone, if you're here listening and you got the vote, yeah, help us out. If you got any questions, feel free to ping me. Cool. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, thanks very much, Darren. Next up is Moderna Working Group by Bjorn, I guess. Bjorn Hill. Are you online?
Bjorn's online, and I just made Bjorn presenter, so he's ready to go when he's ready.
All right.
Bjorn, you're still on mute, just FYI, and I've made you presenter.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, why doesn't it let me share?
Are you using the GoToMeeting app, Bjorn?
Yes, I am.
If you go to the bottom, it's the screen option. You have mic, cameras.
Yeah, but it says I need to open my system preferences.
Oh no. Well, maybe we can transition to a tool if he's ready, and we can work through that. You can either send me your deck and I can present it. So why don't we do that? We'll transition to a tool who will go ahead and provide a update on shared signals. Atul, you're a presenter now, so feel free to proceed when you're ready. And thanks for the flexibility.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just about to present. Right. Can you, I suppose you can all see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have a surprise presenter today, Tim Capelli from Microsoft will be joining me in the presentation here. I would like to provide a quick update on where we were in spring, and then just go from there. For those who don't know, we are trying to come up with a way in which we can convey changes to state across different parties that share certain common principles like users, authentication, devices, apps, other things. For now, we are concerned mainly about two things, which is continuous access evaluation, and then the other one is catastrophic account compromise. So those are the two applications that we are worried about today. But this could be a more broader technology that can be used for other things as well. So just quickly, what are these two applications that we're talking about? So continuous access is, continuous access evaluation is required for conveying changes, which may be routine changes about a user or a session or a device that is shared across different providers. And so typically the events that we're talking about here are, let's say the user's credential has changed, or the claims in a particular token, like an IP address, have changed, or the user's level of assurance has changed, or the device that the user is using, the compliance level of that device has changed. Whereas on the risk side, we are talking more about, when a user is trying to do a coordinated attack, or not a user, but, some attacker is trying to do a coordinated attack on multiple systems, we see that there is always a correlated, or quite often a correlated pattern. And so, what we're proposing is, this the risk standard, which is already there. These are the particular events that, type of events that they are interested in, which is, like an account is purged from one provider, or one provider has decided that because of the activity that a credential change is required for that user, or, that they have recycled the identifier because some other user has, obtained ownership of that account. So, those are the kinds of things that risk worries about. Now, in terms of the spec development, what we've done since spring is, we have created a first draft of the spec, and we are very close to being able to solicit feedback from outside the working group. We have gone through a couple of iterations from within the working group. We did that in a virtual workshop in Google in June. And then one thing that happened after that is some part of that spec got moved into a new, subject identifiers draft specification in the IETF security event token working group, the SEC events working group. And so we reworked the spec to rely on that draft, and there's one or two open issues that we need to just resolve there. But we've also started work on, we expect there to be three outputs of this work. One is the shared signals and events profile of security event tokens, which will replace the existing risk profile of security event tokens. And then there will be a new CAPE event types specification. And then the existing risk event type specification will, just work with the new SSE profile spec. With that, let me talk a little bit about what has changed in the SSE spec. So we're trying to address, enterprise use cases where, there may be groupings of users. We are calling them SPAGs, subject principal administrative groupings. And these represent things like, maybe tenants within a multi-tenanted transmitter or receiver, or it could be organizational units, or groups, or some other grouping that the parties may have, and they may be referenced by the events as a part of the subject, or one or two events, like things that, like, a transmitter decides to unilaterally stop providing updates about some grouping, maybe a tenant, maybe an event by itself, which has the SPAG as the subject identifier. So this is some of the main changes. There are other changes related to the event stream management relating to this, but this is really the heart of the change. Now I'll let Tim come to this slide. He's working on the event type specification.
Yeah, thanks, Atul. Just wanted to highlight, the five that I think are baked at this point. Most of the conversation was around session revoked. We spent a lot of time talking about, subject identifiers and how do you combine a user and a device, because in many cases, both parties are not going to have an exact session identifier, or may not use the same user identifier. So it's, as you can imagine, big platforms like Office 365, right? Each of those, SharePoint versus Teams, they may all have different identifiers, and that also persists across organizations as well. So session revoked was a very interesting one and consumed probably the most time discussing, because we wanted to make sure it was flexible enough to be as granular as an actual session identifier that you know about, that you know is common, to something a little bit more flexible, like here's a user identifier and a device identifier, revoke the session for that user on that device, right? So it's very flexible. And sorry, I'm jumping around the slides, but the big thing is we did not mandate specific subject identifiers per event type. So that user and device subject identifier type could be used for any event type. We wanted to leave it flexible to cover, there's so many different types of parties that are involved. It's not just authentication related. So we wanted to make sure we could cover all those. So the other ones are token claims change. The idea with this one really is for things that are not necessarily, for things that don't necessarily require reissuing a token, that could be an ID token, an access token, a SAML assertion, provide a way to update one of the values for the session out of band, right? So, your JWT access token may have an IP address or a location tag in it. You may not want to remint a token if that changes, but you may want to notify the other party that changed. So this one is very flexible in that the goal was to not have, 100 different event types just to handle each of the claims that are inside of a token, right? The goal is to, provide a way, just say this was the claim in this token, and here's what the new value is. Credential change, right? And now that we have a wide variety of credential types out there beyond passwords, traditional certificates, FIDO authenticators, verifiable credentials, GIDs, right? We wanted to be able to inform, if necessary, that this account now has a stronger authentication method bound to it. A device compliance change, which is really kind of an MDM style flow, very basic, compliant, non-compliant. And then assurance level change, which is really around, I started a session at 1 RP, let's say, and used a weak credential, and then I started a new session at the next one and used a strong credential, right? So there may be a need to communicate that to other parties. And the big thing, right, is that custom claims are allowed between the transmitter and receiver. Each event type, and you can switch a tool. Each event type has a set of required claims, and then there are some predefined claims that we think address the majority of use cases, but there is no restriction on, 2 parties agreeing to add additional claims. So if you want to switch slides to tool, this is just a sample of, I believe I did session revoked. So I just used Microsoft as the IDP, Google Workspace as the receiver. Here's a session revoked for, this user on this device. In this case, the user is a email format. The device is a GUID. And then the initiating entity was a policy. So a policy determined that the session should be revoked. And we give kind of some optional ways to convey information, an admin code, which may be the more machine type code. And then if, an optional user centric code, which, if you want to display that to the user, it's, an alternative text versus a error code. And so, that's where we're at. I think we're probably, so we have 5 right now. I think probably by the time we get to implementers draft, we probably may have 10. These are the 5 that are baked, and we're still working on this actively. Once we try to get the more complicated ones out at the beginning. And the one thing I would add at the end, I think as this has evolved, and speaking specifically from Microsoft's angle, we see SCIM, FastFed, and CAPE / SSE kind of all becoming kind of one circular, one modern version of an IAM stack, right? We envision long-term that FastFed could provision CAPE, and then SCIM obviously handles the more traditional user provisioning, but maybe CAPE could handle exception use cases. So we see these as all related, and we think they can very easily be deployed to kind of modernize the way folks do things today with user provisioning and session management.
Great, thanks, Tim. That was it from our side. I don't know if we have time for questions. I'll hand it back to Mike Bless.
What we're going to do at Tools, we're going to transition over to Bjorn Helm, Vice Chairman Bjorn Helm at this point, to do a Moderna update. And then for those that are still on, since we're going long, we'll go ahead and open up a brief Q&A at the end.
Mike, are you making me presenter?
Yeah, just give me a second, Bjorn. Bear with me. Should be good now, Bjorn. Thank you.
You see my screen?
We're good, thanks.
Yep. Fantastic. You guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Take silence is yes. Okay. So this is the Moderna Working Group. It's the mobile profile OpenID Connect. John and I are co-chairs of the group. The purpose of the group was to support the technical development of Mobile Connect, developed by GSMA, and to enable mobile network operators to become IDPs. And scope of the group was, or the purpose was, to start to develop a profile of OpenID Connect as well extensions for use by MNOs to provide identity services. Participants and contributors, there's a slew of participants. It's a mix of mobile network operators and vendors. So what is Mobile Connect? The mobile phone number is used as a user's identifier. The mobile device is the authenticator, and the MNO does the authentication of the user, serving as an IDP. With the intention of replacing the password and hardware security tokens. So how does Mobile Connect works? Again, the user tries to log in to their application or web service. The RP does a discovery to determine who the MNO is. There's an authentication request going to the mobile network operator. Using the device the user is authenticated, and the MNO responds to the RP with the successful or unsuccessful authentication. What's the current status? So we have 4 specification in implemented draft status. We are currently preparing for a second implemented draft of user question API specification. Earlier this year, we completed the second implemented draft of the CBAC core, and that was in our spring presentation. So right now we're doing a second implementation of the user question API based on some implementations by Orange and Telefonica. And besides that, the group is working on taking 3 other specifications to implement this draft. One is the Moderna CBAC profile. For those involved in FAPI, there's also a FAPI profile of the CBAC core spec. In addition to that, also the discovery and registration profile. We're also working on a certification program of the profiles in additions to the OpenID Connect specification that this working group has developed. Any information, you can go to the URL at the bottom of the page. In addition, we have several collaborations and outreaches. One is with GSMA, obviously, working on their evolution of their Mobile Connect architecture. In addition to that, there are some OpenID Connect functionality in RCS. And finally, there's also, you can use specified OpenID Connect for onboarding a device that requires user interaction. So mobile, as I mentioned, we have a collaboration with GSMA. So the ownership of the Mobile Connect specification has transitioned into the Mobile Connect Interest Group from the Identity Program. And it's a membership of both vendors and operators. There is a technical subgroup that works on the core specifications. Currently, we are in a planning phase for a joint OpenID Foundation GSMA workshop, similar to foundation workshop or joint workshops that was held with the OBI and FTX. And in addition to that, we also started, or GSMA had reached out about OpenID Foundation taking more of an ownership of the technical development of Mobile Connect. And that is a recent development. In addition to that, we are starting interactions with 3GPP, the Third Generation Partnership Project. It's an organization that's responsible for the wireless communication standards that majority of any 3, 4, or 5G networks are built upon. They developed a set of specification for mission critical services. As part of that requirement was to support user authentication, and that is done through an OpenID Connect profile. There's been further enhancements to develop something called service-enabled architecture layer to support vertical applications like vehicle to anything, and it's based on the mission critical services. So identity management is a common capability now to support mission critical and other vertical applications within 3GPP, and that is based on OpenID Connect. So we're having outreach to 3GPP about transition some of that work into the foundation instead. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Bjorn. And so that was the last presentation. The next up actually is the final closing remarks by Don Thibault.
Yes, if I may, I just wanted to give you a real quick heads up to one great development in our community at large, and that is the focus of our colleague Vittorio, who has a brief announcement to make.
Vittorio.
Thanks, Don. I was waiting for GoToMeeting to respond to my commands. Thank you. I just wanted to let you guys know that we started a new podcast about specifications. And the aim is to try to help practitioners understand really what specs mean for them, and also to surface some of the things that we discuss during our mailing list exchanges, but that never end up being in the spec, but could really help people to understand what's going on. And we featured some characters that you well know, Brian, Dr. Daniel Fett, and in general, we are getting really excellent results. Like people are saying that they find it, like they finally understand some of the things that they never did understand. So if you have people that you want to help to understand some of this stuff, this is one tool that you can use. And if you have topics that you believe deserve to be better explained to people, and if you want to be the one being interviewed and similar, please reach out to me at vittorio@ofzero.com, and I'll be happy to see if I can feature you. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks a bunch, Vittorio. I know the OpenID Foundation proposition is to go very deep into these technical specifications, and Vittorio's invitation is to go even deeper still in these podcasts, which we welcome, and OpenID supports informally, and we'll continue to help out as best we can. I wanted to thank all of you that have survived this long march through OpenID Foundation's working groups. I hope that it demonstrates what we began with, and what our essential proposition is that OpenID Foundation membership, and equally as important, your investment in your time and work group deliberations, has a return on that investment. It provides you, your team, and your organization early awareness of how these important industry standards are being developed. And frankly, early influence on how they're shaped and how they come to market. So our collaboration with FDX, with ISO, with IETF is really part and parcel of trying to move these standards forward. We certainly are aware that the current economic environment has accelerated the adoption and frankly the need for standards in eKYC and identity assurance. We certainly understand that the financial grade API work is also occasioned by the dynamics of disruption in the economy at large and in this new open banking ecosystem that we've talked about. So I just wanted to thank all the participants, all the presenters, Don Cardinal and his team, and the FDX community for joining in this effort. And I think you'll be hearing more from us about other events, both sponsored by OpenID Foundation and liaison partners like the FDX. So again, please consider joining. Both an investment in financial capital and human capital is one that we think has an important return, particularly in these markets that are moving so quickly and technologies that are coming on stream as well. So let me return it back to our chairman of the board, Matt Sakamura.
Thank you very much for joining this workshop. And thanks, Don, for making a very good summary of those things. I'm not sure, we are already over time for like 30 minutes. I'm not sure if there's any time to field the question. Michaelis, do we?
We certainly could take 5 minutes, Nat. And I'll also share, since you provided the opportunity, that we'll be posting all of the presentation decks as well as the workshop recording to the OIDF website in the coming days. And I will communicate once that's all published to all registrants directly.
Thanks. So any questions from the floor?
Matt, we've exhausted our members and our guests.
Sorry, Marcos Carretero here. I had a question. I think it was on the PSYOP topics, and that was, I think offline authentication was referenced, and I wanted to understand that a bit more.
Offline authentication?
Yeah, I saw that was mentioned on the slide, yes. That was Christina. And I was wondering if it was offline access that was meant versus offline authentication.
Offline access. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So what I meant was the scenarios where individuals get ID tokens or verifiable credentials issued based on offline authentication, because not always people can have online access. So that's what we meant.
Okay. Yeah.
And that gives me an opportunity to thank, in particular, our members and participants who are up at God knows what hours of the evening or mornings. So again, thanks to our global audience and those that have sacrificed time outside of the office, so to speak.
All right. So I guess we can wrap up. Thank you very much, everybody, for spending time with us, and see you in the next workshop, I guess. Right?
Thank you. Get some sleep.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.